You're listening to Long Distance. I'm Paola Mardo. We are living in very different times right now. For example, you might be listening to this at home, where most of us, I hope, depending on where you live in the world, are staying in and self isolating. We're washing our hands for at least 20 seconds, and if we absolutely need to go outside, we're practicing safe social distancing of at least 6 feet. The novel coronavirus, COVID-19, has impacted every aspect of society all over the world. No one is immune to it. It's affected everyone, old and young, big companies and small businesses, healthcare workers most especially, and even an independent producer and podcaster like me. I actually lost a pretty big paid project because of COVID-19, but that's nothing compared to the thousands of people suffering from this disease, either physically, financially, or otherwise. And if a global pandemic wasn't enough, we're also in the midst of a disturbing trend: anti-Asian racism and xenophobia. It happened to me. I experienced racism in the time of coronavirus. I'll tell you what happened, and heads up, there's a curse word or two in this episode. It happened just over a week ago, on the first sunny day after a rainy week in Los Angeles. I'd already been staying home because of COVID-19, but on this day, I decided I would take a quick trip to my local seafood city, a Filipino chain grocery store in Eagle Rock Plaza, a Filipino mall in a pretty Filipino, albeit gentrifying neighborhood, where you can get your turo-turo next to your Jollibee next to your Chowking. Now I know everyone's panic buying, please stop that, but I didn't need to stock up. I already bought some extra things on past grocery trips, because if you don't already know, I'm very into preparedness. I have 3 earthquake kits. I actually needed to pick up some ingredients to make a birthday cake and dinner for my producer, partner, whatever, Patrick Epino's upcoming birthday celebration. A social distancing party of 3, myself, Patrick, and his 80-year-old father. Because of Patrick's father's age and history of heart disease, he is very high risk for illness from COVID-19. He typically splits his time between his home in Las Vegas and our place in LA, but last week we decided he should stay with us for as long as needed during this pandemic. So since I live with a high-risk individual, I wore an N95 mask to the store. We bought them last year during the big fires here in LA. Told you, I'm very prepared. Seafood City wasn't too crowded, but they were out of all the things I needed. I knew it was bad because they were out of ginger and Ligo sardines. I should have known Filipinos would clear out the ginger and the Ligo during a pandemic. So I turned around, returned my cart, and walked out empty-handed. Just as I walked out the mall doors, on my way to the parking lot right outside, I heard a woman's whiny voice. "Oh my god, China brought the virus here." My ears perked up. My mind was like, what the fuck? Did I just hear that? Even worse, I thought, is that for me? I looked around. There was no one in my immediate vicinity except for a woman walking near me and a man trailing right behind her. She wasn't Asian or Filipino, but she was a woman of color. She was plump, dressed super casually in tights or something, and I can't remember her face too well anymore, but I remember a look of disgust. I knew she was the woman who spoke. I knew she wanted me to hear her. I had to pass her to get to my car, so I figured I'd walk in front of her to confirm. She jumped back and almost yelled, "Oh my god, please don't give me the virus." Please wasn't meant to be polite. I was shocked. We were literally at a Filipino mall. Was this woman crazy? Then I thought, was it because I was wearing a mask? Should I tell her it's because an 80-year-old man with heart disease is staying with me? Would she even care? Or was it because of how I looked? Or my skin color? Growing up, I've been asked, "What are you and where are you from?" so many times. Sometimes I get Chinese or Korean or mixed. I assume it's because I may be lighter skinned than other Filipinos, but Filipinos come in all kinds of colors. But I guess all Asians look the same, right? As you know from listening to this show, I'm a 1.5 generation Filipino American woman of color. I have experienced racism and microaggressions in my life, but this was the first time I'd experienced racism due to a global pandemic in my own community and from a woman of color. When the woman told me to please not give her the virus, I crossed her path, then turned back to give her a look. I had a mask on, so she probably didn't see signs of anger, frustration, or anything on my face. I wanted to say something, but I didn't want to start anything. If I'm being honest, she was much, much bigger than me. I also felt that no matter what I'd say, she wouldn't care, or listen, or understand. Even if I said I was living with an 80-year-old and this mask was for protection, even if I said I wasn't sick, even if I said I wasn't from China, nothing would have changed the racist sentiment she already believed to be true. That moment, I realized we're battling more than a virus right now. Asian Americans have historically experienced racism and xenophobia during times of war and disease. In fact, acts of racism against Asian Americans due to COVID-19 have already been taking place across the US and the world, in cities like Seattle, Albuquerque, New York, London. I can't help but think of Vincent Chin at this time. Chin was a Chinese American man who was beaten to death by two white men, Ronald Evans and Michael Nitz, after a bar fight in Highland Park, Michigan in 1982. Evans was a Chrysler plant supervisor and Nitz a laid-off auto worker. Because Chin was Asian, they blamed him and the rising Japanese auto industry for the decline of American automakers. Vincent Chin was Chinese American, and he was beaten to death with a baseball bat so hard that his skull cracked open. His murderers never spent a day in jail. What happened to me is nothing compared to what happened to Vincent Chin, but what happened to me is just one of an increasing number of anti-Asian racist acts, some of them violent, taking place across the US and the world. And it does not help that the President of the United States, Donald Trump, is calling COVID-19 not by its given scientific name, but by a name he completely made up, the Chinese virus.
There are some, at least one White House official, who used the term Kung flu, referring to the fact that this virus started in China. Is that acceptable? Is it wrong? Are you worried that having this virus be talked about as a Chinese virus, that might
I wonder who said that.
Focus,
you know who said that?
That I'm not sure the person's name, but would you condemn the fact
say
that
the term again?
A person at the White House used the term
Just the
Kung
term.
flu. My question is, do you think that's wrong, Kung flu? And do you think using the term Chinese virus, that puts Asian Americans at risk, that people might target them?
No, not at all. I think they probably would agree with it 100%. It comes from China. There's nothing not to agree. Okay, how about the last question? Please go ahead.
Now you might think, it's true. COVID-19 came from China. It's a Chinese virus, and there are other diseases that have been named after the places they came from, like Ebola and MERS or Middle East Respiratory Syndrome. Look, there's no denying where COVID-19 came from, but to call it the Chinese virus without any context creates some serious problems. In America, it puts not just Chinese Americans, but all Asian Americans in danger. And frankly, it's a way to detract from the federal government's failure to take this virus seriously from the beginning. By the way, in 2015, the World Health Organization actually issued best practices for the naming of new infectious diseases, which discouraged the use of naming them after geographic locations. The new guidelines aim to, quote, minimize negative impact on trade, travel, tourism, or animal welfare, and to, quote, avoid causing offense to any cultural, social, national, regional, professional, or ethnic groups. Now, you might think, oh, that's just ridiculous political correctness. But did you know that in the 1980s, AIDS was first called GRID, gay-related immune deficiency. This made people think AIDS was a gay cancer. They literally called it that, which fueled discrimination against the gay community and severely stalled much-needed services and efforts to search for a cure. You can listen to the episode Jaime's Story to learn more about that. And it might be worth mentioning that the 2009 H1N1 influenza virus, also known as swine flu, was first detected in people in the United States. Calling it the American flu would have been blasphemy. In the days after the racist incident I experienced, I started seeing more and more stories about anti-Asian racism on social media and in the news. A week after my experience, Trump posted on Twitter that, quote, "It is very important that we totally protect our Asian American community in the United States and all around the world. They are amazing people, and the spreading of the virus is not their fault in any way, shape, or form. They are working closely with us to get rid of it. We will prevail together." As of this recording, the tweet hasn't seemed to stop the racism. The damage is done. And it's also important to note he used the word they to describe Asian Americans. They are amazing. They are working with us. If Asian Americans are they, who's us? If you still think this is no big deal, read credible news sources. Talk to your Asian friends. Talk to your family. Because this is happening everywhere, and it's getting worse. When it happened to me, I wanted people to know that even in a very diverse community, which includes Asian and Filipino residents and businesses, in a space I feel safe in, this can happen. I remember after it happened to me, I walked away from that woman so shocked, angry, and frankly scared. Of course, I immediately took my phone out and opened Twitter. Trembling while typing, I tried to fit what happened to me in 280 characters or less. Posting about something like this is not what I usually do, but it was something I felt like I had to do. When I got home that day, I told Patrick what happened and recorded some of our conversation.
But it felt like in a movie, and everything kind of like goes hazy and you're just like focused on what just happened.
Yeah.
What did I ever do to her?
People are stupid. I mean, it sucks, right? Like you just have to, you got thick skin to this kind of stuff. I mean, not that I would have taken it so well. I mean, I probably would have, like, my first reaction would be like, look at her and be like, look like you already got some kind of virus, but.
I think when I look back at her, I had a thought, like, do I say something or do I just go? And I was like, it's not even worth it. Of course, I immediately tweeted about it. So, because I think people really need to know. Like, it's actually scary. Like, wow, that's probably the lightest thing that could happen, right?
Yeah.
I'm not getting beat up. There's people who are getting beat up. It's fucked up.
You okay?
Yeah. I was kind of just...
On this episode, I talked to some folks who can offer insight into this disturbing rise in anti-Asian racism and xenophobia in the time of coronavirus. I want to know what's happening and what we can do to help each other. And just a heads up, you've probably already noticed I'm calling this virus coronavirus, the novel coronavirus, and COVID-19. The latter is obviously its official name, but just know all of these terms mean the same thing on this episode. All right. So first up, I talked to Fil-Am, who covers Asian American news and culture on his blog, Angry Asian Man. He's also the co-host of They Call Us Bruce, a podcast that features unfiltered conversations about what's happening in Asian America. I figured if there was anyone to talk to about what's going on right now, it would be Phil. Thank you so much, Phil, for speaking with me today. Before I start with the serious questions, I want to know, how are you doing in this time right now?
I'm a little frazzled, a little more stressed than usual, definitely. I waver between like, it's gonna be all right, and and then the other way is, we're all doomed. Uh, it's
Yeah.
we're just kind of in unprecedented times in my lifetime, So I'm just feeling kind of stressed. I'm worried. Yeah, I'm worried.
I've been following your posts on Twitter, and I know you're tracking a lot of what's going on in terms of anti-Asian racism, xenophobia, and hate crimes related to COVID-19. I myself, as you know, experienced something very recently.
hmm
As angry Asian man, what are you noticing in terms of the things that are happening to Asian Americans? What are the stories that are sticking with you?
I mean, this has been coming for a little while now. Actually, it was a slow trickle, but you started hearing about people giving people funny looks, giving Asians weird looks, and interacting weird handshakes and things like that, or non-handshakes. It just has escalated now. Now that COVID is in the news 24/7, people want someone to blame. You know what I mean? And it just feels like it's really come to a head now, and it's actually like almost halfway acceptable. I think everybody knows that this is a major concern, and so I feel like Asians are kind of the face of this in a way, and that's frightening. That's scary.
And when you say it's been a slow trickle, like when did you start kind of hearing about racist incidents or seeing it in the news?
It started about a month back, maybe.
Okay.
And at first, it was just jokes, right? It was just like people making fun of others. Like if you were Asian and you were sneezing or coughing in public, like people would, like give you a funny look or even say something, and like that's how kids would taunt other Asian kids on the playground. You have the coronavirus. It started to escalate, maybe like 2 weeks back, where we started hearing about more verbal harassment or people being on edge. And then the last week really is when it blew up. I mean, look, historically, Asians have always been kind of seen as there's always been this stereotype of Asians as dirty, as foreign and creating disease and bringing disease to this country, right? It's sort of this stereotype that's been used to drum up xenophobia and anti-Asian hate in this country. I mean, this goes back, since the beginning of this country. And so the virus's origins in China, that's a ripe ready excuse for people to use that to direct their hate at Asians once again. It's part of the whole yellow peril complex that this country seems to be mired in
Right.
through its history.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up history because just off the top of my head, I think about like Japanese Americans during World War II and how they faced, incarceration in concentration camps at that time. They were being blamed and they're Japanese American, right? Can you think of other, or can you kind of share other kind of times in history that kind of stick out that are maybe similar to what we're experiencing right now?
I mean, around the time with the sort of the anti-Asian sentiment that resulted in the Chinese Exclusion Act. I mean, there were people rounding up Asians in towns and driving them out and lynching them. It's always when people feel threatened economically. There's economic anxiety around sort of the threat of Asian labor force, or even in the 80s when the Japanese auto industry was kind of threatening
Mm-hmm.
the American auto industry,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
I mean, you saw like a deep anti-Japanese sentiment during that time,
Yeah.
which resulted in the death of
Vincent
Vincent Chin.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up because I was honestly thinking about him because he was Chinese American and he was beat up and Asians are all the same, right? So these guys just placed their anger on this one person and it led to his death.
I mean, I couldn't. I write about sort of hate crimes and racism and stereotypes and a lot of anti-Asian stuff over the years. And I've always felt relatively like it's always grim and it's hard to hear, but I've always felt relatively safe and privileged from where I stood. You know what I mean? When Trump tweeted and called it the China virus for the first time publicly, that was the first time I actually felt like I could be in danger, like really like in a legitimate way. Um, I just thought about like how I run errands in the evenings, go get gas or groceries or something like that. And I don't know, for the first time, I was like, I don't know if I feel totally 100% safe going out alone, in this climate. And I'm Korean American, but people see my face. They're not going to give a shit about that, right?
Yeah. You brought up being afraid or feeling uncertain about going out. I mean, after what I experienced, that was in Eagle Rock, which is a pretty Filipino neighborhood. So I thought I was in a safe environment.
Right. But, this can't be the first time in your life you felt like someone's accosted you for being Asian, though, right?
Oh,
I mean,
no,
like,
no. But it's the first time for me related to a pandemic. I've never lived through a pandemic.
yeah. Right. But I feel like this sentiment has always been kind of simmering below the surface. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
we talk a lot about the model minority myth, and that's sort of this weird characterization of Asians as being able to assimilate very well, be successful and stuff like that. It's deeply problematic, but that whole thing shatters actually whenever we're faced with something like this, right? Where you know, guess what? You were never really going to assimilate ever. You're never that welcome here. You have this face that, makes you stick out. It's that perpetual foreigner, our community is always characterized by, and so guess what? Just take this moment here to give people the green light to express that, and how quickly things can turn, right?
Yeah. I mean, you've been covering this for almost 20 years, right? How do you compare this moment to other things you've covered in the past? I mean, have you ever seen anything like this before? What's happening in terms of racism and xenophobia?
No, I've never seen anything like this. I've read about it, right? We have these historical examples where it was very much the case where like this kind of sentiment and violence was very real, and very out in the open. But this is the first time in my lifetime where it feels like this is like one of those moments in history, and I don't like the feeling of living through it, honestly. Um, yeah, no, this is nothing really like this. I mean, a global pandemic it was a nightmare scenario, and now it's real. And then the stuff that comes along with that, with regard to my identity, my community, I had never really wanted to let myself think about that, but it's here.
Yeah. I mean, what do you think's going to happen? What's your outlook on this in the coming weeks or months or even years? And do you see anything positive or any changes ahead?
I think it's gonna get worse. You know what I mean? It's gonna get worse before it gets better. I hate to paint it with a bad brush and be alarmist, but I am truly like kind of frightened by this and concerned. This sentiment, this anti-Asian feeling across the United States is so out in the open, and people are mad and confused and scared, and they want someone to blame. And so, I think it might get worse and then it'll get better. The other part of that is that we're more equipped to fight back. We're more equipped to raise this as an issue. I would hope that we have more allies to recognize this as well. But honestly, it is hard to combat when you have the person in charge being totally okay with it.
Is there anything Asian Americans should be doing, you think, or something we can do in this moment? You just mentioned, like, you know, bringing this up, calling it out when we can, but are there other kind of tangible things that you think about?
Uh,
Not to give us more work in the time of a global pandemic, but
I think this is also a good time to reflect and recognize that this is our moment where we're going through a great deal of hardship, but this is also the story of America and the sort of marginalized people throughout this country's history. It's been bad for everybody, and particularly bad at different points in history. This, unfortunately, is another part of our story, right? And so maybe recognizing that this kind of hardship or suffering, it goes across all the groups. It goes across all the folks who are trying to make it and trying to get by. I don't know, man. I hope we can all get through this together. We're gonna get through this as a community and the way we connect, and not in the way we sort of shrink away. And I don't know. I feel like it does help for other people to see that we're doing this together. We're fighting back, and we're kind of going through it all together, right? It helps.
that was Fil-Am, blogger of Angry Asian Man and co-host of the podcast They Call Us Bruce. I'll have links to those on the show website, longdistanceradio.com. As you've heard, anti-Asian racism and xenophobia is spreading just as far and wide as COVID-19. In the US, the state of Washington has become one of the hardest hit areas. Washington is also home to a thriving Filipino American and Asian American community. Back in January, Devin Cabanilla posted on Twitter about a racist incident that happened at a Costco in Seattle, Washington, where he lives. This racist incident happened not to him, but to his 3 children, specifically his 8-year-old son and his wife. By the way, Devin is Filipino American, his wife is Korean American. Devin is an administrator in education for the Seattle area. He works out of the International District, home to the city's Asian American community, and he's on the board of the Seattle chapter of the Filipino American National Historical Society.
Hi, this is Devin.
Hey, Devin. I called Devin to ask him about what happened to his family and how he talked to his children about racism.
A few weeks ago, we decided to go out and get lunch and then go shopping at Costco at the same time on Sunday afternoon. And we went in, and my son, who's 8 years old, he actually asked during the early period when the coronavirus was starting if he could wear a mask. And I actually have a bunch of masks on hand because of forest fires that come out of Canada every summer. And my son asked if he could wear one, and I have child-sized ones. So I brought out the mask and I gave him one of them. His main reason for wearing the mask was because other kids early on when the coronavirus started coming out, other kids were going to school with masks on. And the interesting thing where I live is his school is 90% Asian, and all of our neighbors are Asian American of some kind in my part of the Seattle area. So Vietnamese, Indian, Cambodian, Chinese, and then we're Filipino, Koreans. So my son wore that mask to Costco that day, just kept on wearing it, even when we weren't at school. So we walk into the Costco. I decide to sit somewhere, eat my pizza. And then my wife and son go towards the back, and there's a woman there at the sampling station giving out green tea. And they went up, and the woman at the sampling station asked really specifically, "Have you come from China?" And my wife was really shocked. And she's like, "No." She tried to explain. And the woman continued and said, "I've been seeing a lot of people like you with masks on. And I don't know if any of you are from China." And at one point, my son tried to grab one of the samples, and she stopped him and said, "I need you to step away. I'm scared you're going to get me sick." And basically, she's just indicating, I don't know if you're really from China or not. She's just kind of doubting what they were bringing up. After that, my wife and son came back. Also have 2 other kids that were with them as well. So all 3 of my kids came back with their mom towards where I was sitting, and they were just kind of shouting, "This lady thought we were from China. This lady thought we were from China." And I got surprised, and then I got annoyed. Oh, shoot, now I have to do something to address this because obviously racist, obviously now have to complain about this to the manager. So I went to the front of the store and asked for someone, and the floor supervisor came out. And surprisingly, it was really easy to talk to the supervisor who came out because he was Asian American too. So I didn't have to go through this whole explanation. And he just immediately accepted, "Oh yeah, that's screwed up. I'm going to handle it right away." So I left the store feeling comfortable. Yeah, I know he's going to go over there and talk to that lady and tell her that was screwed up. But then as we were going home, I realized as my kids kept on talking and my wife started processing it, on the ride back, they were just getting more and more alarmed at what happened. And they started asking questions about the situation. Why did she do that? Why did she think we're from China? Is it because of how we look? Is it because of how mom looks? They started to blame themselves, blame my wife.
Can I clarify? So the woman, was she white?
Yeah, white middle-aged woman.
So how did you explain this to your kids? How old are your other kids?
8, 10, and 12. So the other 2 are 10 years old, 12 years old.
What were your answers to their questions about, is it because of what we look like? Like, why was she asking? Like, how do you explain racism to kids, to your kids?
I make a really important point to be very plain about it, and I don't try to gloss it over. But I do remember in the car just telling them, you experienced racism, and that is how people see you that don't know who you are. Then after that, I tried to go into explaining stereotypes. You were getting stereotyped because you look Asian, and the stereotype is all Asians are the same. You're experiencing a very common stereotype, and that is something that you just need to know is real now because you actually experienced it. And that was the kind of conversation that I had with my kids. This isn't the first time I've talked to my kids about race, but it's the first time we've had to explain it happening to them.
Yeah. How are your kids doing now and your wife? I mean, it's been weeks now. I mean, has anything else happened since then or?
Everything's just sort of escalated in terms of race issues and the coronavirus. A couple days after our incident, my daughter's friend, they had an incident where a guy went up to them on purpose and harassed them.
Where were they when this happened?
They were at what's called an Amazon hub. It's an Amazon pickup point. And this guy walked up to them and got close on purpose and then said, "Oh, I might get coronavirus from you." And then the lady tried to explain, "We're not Chinese. We're from the Philippines." And then this guy is just obviously intent on escalating it, started talking all this crazy stuff. "Oh, you're from the Philippines? All of your people get to come to my country, but if I go to your country, you guys cut Americans' heads off and you prostitute your children and you eat dogs." And he was just ranting about every single horrible thing he could think of about the Philippines. The only reason it stopped is because another Asian woman in the store tried to step in between them and sort of help them out.
You're very involved in your community there in Seattle. I'm wondering if you have thoughts on what Asian Americans or anyone who faces racism at this time, like, what should we do? Is there something we should do, like report incidents or like, what do we do?
Yeah. I mean, for my situation, I got really constructive about it. And even doing that didn't feel like it's enough. I used to work in healthcare, and I reached out to different community leaders, and then they self-organized Asian discrimination campaign to go along with the city public health materials. And even that, I feel like, still isn't enough. It's still in the background. And yeah, I feel like it's going to take a lot of Asian Americans or immigrant groups to get louder together and show as a block that there's something going on and it's messed up. The only thing that we can do individually is react. And then the next step after that is try to bring it to police, make a report. You can try to influence policy or programs. But yeah, the next stage that we need to get to is organizing some kind of advocacy movement.
Yeah. Well, I guess the last thing I really want to ask you is, I mean, what's it like on the ground there right now in Seattle? You guys are you're really in the thick of, what's going on. Like, what's it like for you? I know you're able to still work, but in terms of your own community, and you have a pretty large Filipino American community, do you know how it's affecting Filipino Americans?
Oh, it's been horrible. And just Asian Americans in general. Like, have a Cambodian friend who's been helping Filipinos organize food deliveries. One of the interesting problems today is me and others trying to plug resources to those in need. And the situation's so new, we can't even find places to distribute because the need's not obvious right now. And then another thing is Filipino businesses have been closing. One of the first things I did when they announced a restaurant closure in Washington State, my friend asked everyone if they wanted food, come by her restaurant. And I went to her restaurant And she was basically indicating, yeah, that's it, we're shut. And it's like, oh, you mean just for the ban period? I'm like, no, like, I'm just going to call it quits now.
Can I ask you what restaurant this is?
Nate's Wings and Waffles, which is half owned by the NBA basketball player, Nate Robinson, and then also one of our local Filipinos here.
So they're closed for good.
I think so. I mean, anything can change right now. It's so unpredictable. She was basically indicating, yeah, I think this is it. Like, I don't know if we're going to recover from this. If the government grants turn things around, that'd be one thing. Another thing that was really crazy is Hood Famous Bake Shop, who's famous for their ube cheesecake. They are shut down as long as there's a crisis.
Man, I mean, I'm really sad to hear about all that's happening. I mean, hopefully things turn around sooner than later, but at this point, it's really uncertain.
Oh, yeah.
I'm glad to hear you're fine and you and your family are doing well and are healthy. Thank you so much for speaking with me, Devin. I really appreciate it. I know folks who listen to the podcast will really want to hear you guys' story. Thanks, Devin.
Yeah, it was good talking to you, Paula.
Okay, so that's about it for this episode of Long Distance. But before I say goodbye, I want to tell you something. In the days after I experienced racism related to COVID-19, I came down with some mild symptoms. It started with a noticeably itchy throat, then a cough. It got me really worried because, like I said at the top of the show, Patrick's 80-year-old father with heart issues is staying with us. So I immediately quarantined myself in a room and called my medical provider. A doctor I spoke with told me they could not test me, and after I told him about my symptoms, which didn't include a fever, he said I could have a cold or allergies, but right now, since we are in a public health emergency, I should assume I have coronavirus and quarantine myself in a room. So, I've been here, living in the same room for a little over a week now. I've only gone outside a few times to get some fresh air on the balcony, and even then, I wore a mask. I'm okay though. I have no fever and my symptoms are almost gone. I feel great. I should say I'm so thankful we have this spare room and that Patrick has been a really great partner and caregiver in all of this. He's been bringing me food, making sure I have what I need, and sending me notes on this episode through phone calls, video chats, and email. The doctor I spoke with advised I should self-isolate for at least 7 days since my first symptoms appeared, and for at least 3 days since showing no more symptoms. Confusing, I know. So, Patrick and I have decided that I will quarantine myself in this room for about another week, just to be sure, because we live with a high-risk individual. So yeah, I have some more days left in here, but don't worry, I'm okay and I will have an update for you next episode on how I'm doing. For now, I want to ask you a favor. I want to hear how you're doing. I know that in this moment right now, we should be social distancing, but it doesn't mean that we can't connect in other ways. So since you're home and, frankly, have nothing better to do, call our long-distance hotline and share your social distancing stories. I want to know, how do you feel right now? What's your stay-at-home situation like? If you have to go out, why and what do you do? Are you a healthcare worker? Are you on the front lines of this COVID-19 fight? What's happening in your community? Have you experienced racism? What are you doing to fight back? What's getting you through this? And do you have any words of advice for other people? Call 213-293-6024 and leave your name, where you're calling from, and your message. I'll try to put it in next week's episode. I think we all need a little love, kindness, and good thoughts right now. So I hope you'll take the time to send something. Thanks. This episode was written, edited, mixed, and hosted by me, Paola Mardo. Long Distance is produced by Patrick Epino and me. You can learn more about this story in the show notes on our website, longdistanceradio.com. This season of Long Distance is produced with support from PRX and the Google Podcast Creator Program, as well as our donors on PayPal and our Patreon members, supporters, and ambassadors. To learn more about supporting the show, head to longdistanceradio.com/support. Music in this episode is by Blue Dot Sessions. Theme song is by Sea Light and the Prisms. Thanks for listening. Stay safe and healthy. Talk to you soon.